Everyone, thank you for joining us today. I am Maddy Martin. I'm the head of growth and education for Smith.ai, and we are a 24/7 virtual receptionist and chat service for small businesses, large growing businesses too, but our niche where we started out is really small businesses. The vast majority of our clients are solo and small law firms. The topic for today and our guest, Jan Roos, he is going to be talking about how to host webinars that convert new leads. So I will let him introduce himself in a moment. This is fully recorded and we will have notes in the show notes and the follow-up so that any additional resources are provided to you. Really, the goal today is to identify those tweaks that you can use to turn great content into a lead generating machine. Psychology-based 3-part webinar structures that get attendees to take action. Hopefully those are the leads that you want to convert into clients, no matter what type of business that you're in, but we'll be using a lot of law firm examples. And a proven script to turn webinar attendees into consultations on your calendar. So how do you actually move that business forward? Jan will also talk about common beliefs that lead to tens of thousands of dollars in wasted spend. So how to really cut the wheat from the chaff and figure out the most important things to focus on if you are going to use webinars as a lead capture, lead generation, lead conversion tool for your business or your law practice. So with that said, Jan, great to have you here, and please introduce yourself.
Great, thank you so much, Maddy. That was a fantastic introduction. So as far as how I got into the webinar space, basically, I've been in legal. If you guys have seen me before, I published a book called The Legal Marketing Fastlane a couple of years ago. I've been running the Law Firm Growth podcast for a few years. I'll make the event circuit pretty much around the clock. But basically, I got my start and my company got our start in doing pay-per-click for law firms, which was really, really hot topic back in 2015 when we got the ball rolling. But leading into COVID, basically, we already, going into 2020, had been running campaigns for hundreds of law firms. But we had a really interesting situation because we were periodically switching our focus on practice areas. And in retrospect, one of the better business decisions I've ever made, which was complete luck, was deciding to focus on estate planning heading into 2020. So, COVID hit our clients the same it hit everyone else. And we had a situation where a lot of estate planning attorneys were like, well, hey, I was getting 50 clients a month on seminars and the governor just told me that we can't run those. So what the heck are we supposed to do, Jan? So basically, me and my team ended up pretty much being all hands on deck. It was a very stressful couple months, but a very productive couple months. And we were basically had the germ of a webinar formula, which we've been kind of refining and honing in ever since then. So since that point, we've actually run this model for over 100 estate planning practices, and it is still what we're focusing on. We've seen some people, I know the webinar model was really, really hot for a moment in COVID. We've seen some other players join and leave, but we sunk our teeth in and we are not going anywhere. I know COVID is not necessarily the hot topic it once was, but there's so much power in this model, especially for a certain type of firm. But it's more complex. We're not talking about a knife. This is like, a Rube Goldberg machine. But if you get everything right, it's a fantastic opportunity. And I'll kind of get into why and how that is in the presentation, I guess. So
great.
So should we go ahead and get the ball rolling?
Let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then we can keep going. Okay. So I'm going to hit play. And then from this point forward, I'll have a little less control. So just keep me alive. All right, so like Maddy said, this is how to host webinars that convert new leads. So there's a couple different parts we're gonna go into, but I'll kind of get into that. But there's the actual webinar itself. There's the structure of the webinar, which I'm actually gonna go over first, because if you don't set this up properly, you stand close to zero chance of closing people, because a lot of people set this up in a way where there's no one to close. But we'll go into that and how to get it soon. So the first thing I want to say, this is not for every service. And Maddy, you actually went through one of my favorite examples. The stuff that comes our way pretty frequently, and like I mentioned, we do a lot of this stuff with estate planning. So if you are in a market or you have a portion of your service that would benefit from education, i.e. if you took somebody off the street and they would be more incentivized to move forward if they knew what was going on, or it's not generally known knowledge, then the webinar could work for you, right? So to go back to the example of estate planning, the reason why this works, the reason why the seminar model works before, and this completely blows people's minds when I hear, like, I mean, I was blown my mind when I heard it, because like we're dealing with some of these seminar-based firms and people say, well, do you know that when you pass away, then you have to go through the probate process and that could cost your family tens of thousands of dollars. When people are like, oh my God, it's not generally known knowledge. And most people, when they have that knowledge, they're incentivized to move forward. That's why seminars work for estate planning firms. When people have a situation where they say, well, you know what, Jan, it sounds cool that you guys do this for estate planning, but we really focus on probate. Can you run webinars for probate? And as good as we can possibly get at webinars, there's nothing that we can say in a webinar that's going to make someone's immediate family member die. That is beyond our powers. So probate is a more reactive way. To go back to personal injury, very proactive thing. There's nothing that you can educate somebody about that's going to make them pursue a case, because the case doesn't exist. It's you're educating them doesn't create the need. On the flip side, we can get into this towards the end, but there are methods for certain areas where people might not be aware they qualify for something. Certain things related to people who have class action lawsuits, for example. We're working on a campaign completely incidentally, not actually a webinar one, but basically this guy was doing some asbestos stuff for the Tennessee Valley Authority. So if you worked for that company before 1980, you might be eligible for something. So that's the kind of stuff that we might be able to get this to work for. But keep that in mind. Again, if this is, if you're dealing with hair on fire problems, you can't create one with a webinar, but you can harvest it. But if you do fit the bill, this is why this is exciting. So this is from, if you guys are familiar with this guy, Chet Holmes, the late great, unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but this is from a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine, really, really popular. But basically, we're talking about, people throw this term around without really knowing what it means. The lead generation is basically the ability to capture somebody who has already said, hey, I'm interested, I need to hire this right now. So going back to that personal injury person, that's somebody who's raising their hand. That actually only represents about 3% of the total market. If you consider the total market of everyone that qualifies for your service, at any given time, 3% of them are hair on fire and need to buy this right now. But where we can really get some headway in the webinar model is getting those people who are open to buying but not looking. So more of a push, and even those people who might not be thinking about it but could be incentivized with taking the right next step, right? So that remaining 7 and plus 30 is 37%. Is really exciting, because that makes the total pool of people that you can reach over 10 times as large, right? Now, this is where I think this is really, really, really exciting, is because basically where most people in the legal market, and in general, a lot of this stuff is really popular marketing in general. When you hear stuff, hey, when's the last time somebody said, I can get you on the front page of Google, right? That's the obvious stuff. Somebody typing in estate planning attorney Los Angeles is targeting the people that are in that 3%. What's the deal with those 3%? Well, it's good. We know we can find them. We know more or less anyone who's typing that in is going to have a need, right? But the problem is your competition also knows that, right? They've known it for a long time. Google has not been new for a really, really long time. I think, pay-per-click, by the time we were getting started, it was already on the way out. And these days it's really tough. If you guys are going to make it, you've probably given it a go. But the other thing too is that this is like a real issue for the clients that we work with in estate planning, is that when you have a need like estate planning that you can always say later on, then it's really tough, because people can take as long as they want to decide to use your service. Now, when you combine this with the fact that other people know this, right? We have Google AdWords, we have Abo, we have Justia, we have every single different platform, right? That's the highest cost up. But more importantly, it's the most price competition. The feedback that we were getting from estate planning attorneys heading into 2020 is why we focused on other channels in the first place, was they kept saying, I can't deal with all these price shoppers. Well, you're a fool not to price shop if there's 10 other attorneys on the page, right? And you have all of 140 characters to make your cases why you're better or different. If you want to start to explain people why, they don't have the time. Now, when we flip to this, and I would kind of, I can't see my cursor right here because it's a Mac, but basically that line of the water, imagine that as being right at the bottom of that 3% pyramid. The bottom part of that iceberg, the part that's a lot larger, because we're talking about 10 times the amount of people, is where we have the opportunity for an educational sale, right? So the biggest thing that I think is really powerful about this model is that it provides the opportunity to differentiate. Now, I'm very careful about choosing my words here. It doesn't automatically differentiate you, but if you do things correctly, it's the opportunity to differentiate. Why is that important? Price competition does not happen when you are differentiated. If you have 10 attorneys and they all have the same amount of reviews, the same amount of characters, the same amount of definition of their service. That is a completely exchangeable resource. It's like buying laundry detergent on Amazon. Which one has the most reviews? Which one's the cheapest? That's what most people do, one, two, or the both, right? If we have people that they have been able to educate you, they're able to bring you into something that you haven't thought about before. If you have somebody going through your webinar, and whether you're an attorney or not, they've spent 40 to 60 minutes with you, and they have 40 to 60 minutes worth of reasons why they know how you operate. And if you follow the format we're going to go in a little bit, they should know that you care and that you have expertise in being able to help them. The other thing too is it's a lot lower cost. Cost per click on Google for an estate planning attorney is anywhere between $15 and $25 per click. So if you're crushing it on your conversion rates and you're getting 10 to 20%, that's $150 to $75 per call. And again, these are for calls that are people that are generally going to keep price shopping if you don't pick them up right away. And the other thing too, to contrast, we have people that are getting campaigns on Facebook that are under $1 per click. And again, if we're getting the conversion rate numbers that we're shooting for on the landing page, and I'll show you guys how to get that, then we could be paying for $5 to $10 for registration. And if we're getting 50% of those people to attend, we have $20 for somebody who's been educated about your process versus 75 to 150 on somebody who has been, basically is going to be price shopping you for because they have no other reason to move forward, right? And the last thing too is that it is a more complicated process. We have to find these people, we have to educate them, we have to take the next step. But once you've taken them through that process, there's higher buy-in. There are psychological principles why, mere exposure effect is one of the easy ones you can Google at any time. The more people see you, the more they trust you. And if the path has to take 5 or 10 touches, by the time you get to those 5 to 10 touches, it's like they kind of know you, which is really cool. But I also have to say it's not a magic bullet, right? So this is one of my favorite images. Maddy, you ever heard of a cargo cult?
No.
Okay. I'll keep this super brief. So basically, after World War II, there are all these tiny little islands like Micronesia, Pacific, blah, blah, blah. And we had the Japanese Navy duking it out with the US Navy for, whatever, 3 or 5 years, whatever it is. And they saw planes go over, and sometimes these planes would go down. They'd be filled with supplies and medicine and rations and food and guns and all these different things. So there are these uncontacted tribes who had no idea what a Navy was. And they just saw this giant thing fall from the sky that was filled with goodies and this crazy technology. So there are these religions that just spawned in all these uncontacted tribes because they're like, well, when is the giant metal bird going to come back? So they would actually build these giant planes to try to summon more of these to kind of come through. But obviously we have something that looks like a plane, but it's not going to take off. I would not want to be in that thing if you push it off a cliff, right? So a lot of the situations we have these kind of, I like to call it cargo cult marketing. It's like basically, people look at a webinar, they say, oh, this guy does it right, or I like how this person's doing their live. If it has a video component, if there's a way to move forward, if there's some sort of thing, that doesn't necessarily mean you have the model. Just like there's a lot of stuff that's happening under the hood with a plane that's going to help you actually get this thing to fly, just kind of approximating the function is not going to work on its own. And again, I got to say, one of the things that's super important, which we're going to close on, is what you're going to actually do with these people after you have them, which I'd almost consider that like, the fuel in the plane, right? But basically, just be careful because there's a lot of ways to do this wrong. And that's just kind of the complexity of the model as well. But again, we're going to cover most of the bases in this right here. Okay. Part 1, the structure that converts. So if you get all this stuff right, you're going to have a fighting chance. If you miss any of these things, it's going to be very difficult to actually do anything with this webinar. Okay, first things first, gate your content. Maddy, fantastic job in setting this webinar up because this content is gated. You know who signed up for this. You have their email. There's a possibility of following up with these people if you want to. This is opposed to ungated content, which is something that I saw a huge trend in right after COVID. There were so many people who are saying, go on your live, publish your YouTube, do all this different stuff. And the problem is that does a decent job of educating your process. The problem is, what are you going to do with those people after they've been educated? I'll go and make a claim. So if you have a situation where you're educating your client, but you don't have the ability to follow up with them, you're educating them on the market. You're not educating them on you. And there's nothing worse than spending a bunch of energy putting this content out, God forbid, putting some ad budget towards it, and just have this be something that your clients, your competitor is going to be able to follow up on because they're doing a better job of closing a deal. So first things first, absolutely make sure that you're getting people's information. I prefer name, email, and phone number. If you have a meaty enough webinar, I think it's absolutely fair to ask for a phone number because basically we're going to get to this towards the end. If you don't have the phone number, it's going to be very, very hard to follow up with them. But you're also kind of having a better situation for closing. Comparing this to the analog model, with estate planning, basically they were going to buy you a dinner, but In exchange, you were basically agreeing to be locked in a room with them. You knew what was happening after after that presentation. They're going to ask you for the business, and there's nothing wrong with that. People accept, and if they don't, they won't put their email in. So, I'm sorry, they won't put their phone number in. So basically, I'd recommend getting your content and getting the phone number if possible. Again, that kind of goes into that one. Get their info, phone number, and email is an important thing. Make it convenient. So two kind of aspects to this. You want to have a convenient time in terms of when the webinar is, the options that you have, and what time of the day it is, right? So basically, if you have a webinar that's 6 months in the future, it's going to be easy from an ads perspective, technically, because you have all that time to fill the pot, right? The problem is, who's going to remember this between now and 6 months from now? Very few people, right? The other thing is that if you have multiple options, it actually makes it a lot easier for people to go ahead and run that, right? So if somebody can say, okay, cool, you guys are here at 3 o'clock Eastern, so that's fantastic, you guys can make it. If there's ability to have this webinar at 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and 7 o'clock, and then it would be a lot of work for me and Maddy, obviously, but there would be a higher likelihood that people can make that, right? And again, stuff like recording the webinar is obviously fantastic. This isn't a hardcore sales pitch organization anyway, so this isn't like what we're going for. But if that is your end, you want to make sure that you have the ability for people to actually show up, because if people don't watch your content, then how the heck are they supposed to know how great you are, right? Quick tech tip here. I would really, really recommend investing in a platform. These are all 3 webinar platforms: Stealth Seminar, Webinar Jam, Demio. This is like Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper as far as the different options for this. They all have these features. You can basically set the information that you collect. The cool thing about the automated platform is that for the most part, people have the ability to, you can automatically generate multiple options, right? So basically, whether you want to attend these all yourself, whether you want to record it once and make it look like it's live, these are options that you can have. So what this is going to do is it's going to make your conversion rate go much higher, right? Because if we have 3 webinars as opposed to 1 slot that people can respond to, it's more likely that they're going to pick one that's convenient to you. The other thing is, without making you turn yourself into some sort of dancing monkey and have to do these every hour of every day, you're going to give the opportunity to have these very, very close by, right? So we use Stealth Seminar, for example, and basically with Stealth Seminar, we're generally given the option to attend a webinar at the end of the top of the hour. So right now it's 3 and change. So basically, if you were to sign up for our webinar right now, you'd have the option to choose 4 p.m. or generally 11 a.m. the next day, 7 p.m. the following day is good. Covers the bases. What's convenient for somebody? If they're killing time on Facebook, this is probably a decent time. If not, before lunch is fine. A little bit after dinner is fine, right? So that's good, a model that we use. Okay, confirm and remind. This is also something that's built into some of these tech platforms, but you can also get really, really fancy with this with Infusionsoft and that kind of thing. You got to let people know they responded to it, right? A lot of times too, this is a crying shame when it happens, is that you can have people that go through all the effort, developing the webinar, creating the landing page, running paid traffic to it, and then people forget that the webinar is happening. I'm always shocked to find this out, and this is a lesson that we learned the hard way long before we ended up carrying out this model. But we used to do a lot of lead generation on Facebook, and Facebook is very, very different from Google. The thing about Facebook is that when we had leads getting collected, if we didn't call those people immediately, I'm talking like 5 minutes immediately, the number one objection we get is, I don't remember what ad you're talking about, right? And this obviously was not great for our clients, but that's the thing too. You have to remind that, like, as far as, we can talk about traffic channels a little bit towards the end. It wasn't a lot of stuff we focused on. I focused on preparing for it, but basically we're going out to people and push mediums. We're doing all our advertising for for webinars on Facebook and YouTube, but you have to realize that this is something we're going towards them. They're in sort of a passive receptive state. It's like running a commercial on TV. They're not looking for this, so it's not going to be as much of a sticky point. So really, really easy way to make this stick in someone's brain. After they sign up, let them know that they signed up. Remind them the day after, remind them the day of, remind them 3 hours before, 60 minutes before, 5 minutes before if you have to. And again, if you have the email and the phone number, there's 2 ways that you can do this. Obviously, opt in, check with your local state bar on the legality of sending text messages, etc. But yeah, if they don't know what's happening, a lot of people won't show up. But don't get too fancy. So I'm going to say this is kind of a counterintuitive experiment that we ran that actually ended up going wrong. So basically, no experiment goes wrong. It wasn't, it was a hypothesis that proved not to be fruitful. So we had a situation where we thought, hey, wouldn't it be great if after the person signed up for the webinar, we gave them the opportunity to get a little bit more introduced to the attorney by a little pre-recorded video. And what if we gave them the opportunity to schedule for a consultation right then and there, just in case they were in that 3%. So we thought that was going to be going pretty well. And it's kind of funny, whenever I run these experiments, I feel like beginner's luck is such a real thing, because we ended up getting a couple people who scheduled consults right out of the gate when we did it. But after we'd run the experiment for a week, we realized that treatment had actually reduced the amount of people that showed up on the webinar. And our theory behind that, again, it's just a theory. We've stopped doing that test since we ran it once or twice and the results were confirmed. If you get too fancy, and this is a principle we're going to talk about in the next section, people are on guard for a sale. They don't want to interact further. So just, you want to remind, but don't over remind. Be kind and be thorough, but don't make it too easy and too crazy. Otherwise, people are like, what kind of mousetrap am I getting myself into?
Yeah, Jan, I want to address that, because I think exactly what you're saying, we see this too. And we see this with, some of the campaigns we're exposed to from our clients and our partners. But you actually end up betraying the initial trust and that exposure you were talking about before with, here I am in front of you, just by being in front of you, I have that sort of gained trust with you. And then you immediately sort of pull the curtain back and you're like, this is really my aim. That doesn't sit so well with people. So if you lead with your promise, which is to educate, and you fulfill that without interrupting that chain of events, then you're much more likely to have someone pay attention when you actually do ask them for something in return, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. I think the old adage, and this is not something I made up, but I don't even know who made this up. You hear it so much. Tell more, sell more. Absolutely the case with this kind of thing. So, all right, as far as big picture metrics to shoot for, and we're going to fill this out as we continue going on this presentation, but basically LP conversion rate, landing page conversion rate, we want to shoot for 20%. And then show rate, we want to shoot for 50%. So I'll tell you guys, this is the easy thing. Basically, if you have one of those platforms, show rate should be 50%. We generally see between 50 and 75%. One of the big factors in that is whether it's convenient time and how soon it is. Generally, people who are going to be signing up for the top of the webinar hour almost always show up. It goes down slightly, but you have to give people the option. So it's kind of a happy medium right there. Landing page conversion rate. So one of the biggest factors here is basically you want to have a webinar that people want to sign up for. Again, this is something that would kind of go into more of the ad stuff, but generally we found that people are more oriented around not losing something or not risking something towards getting something, right? So in the realm of estate planning, generally peace of mind is something that a lot of attorneys use for marketing. Never worked well for our tests, honestly. People don't care about getting peace of mind. They care about avoiding the hardships of probate and that kind of thing. If your landing page conversion rate is below that, chances are it could be a design thing. Again, if this is something that you're getting a platform to use, it shouldn't be too much of a factor, but you also might have an issue with your message match. So if you have your ad or your email is talking about one thing and your landing page makes it look different, then that's a big chance for doing that. But overall, those are kind of our recommendations for that. Okay, part two, the webinar itself. So one of the things I think is super, super important is using stories. There's a lot of different reasons why this is important. If you guys have been reading, if you read a business book in the last 10 years, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard at least one thing about this, but what stories do is that it helps engage people. I kind of consider stories one of the best tools that you can use to keep people's attention. We're naturally wired to enjoy stories. I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, story time was my favorite time. Right? You can just turn off your brain. It's almost for me more like engaging than television, but basically people like hearing stories. And the other thing too, is that if we're setting these up in the right way, the story is going to show what your expertise can do. The other thing too, is that stories show people why they should care about something. And it also kind of just, it's just an interesting glue that can hold the entire presentation together. We'll kind of get into how we use this in a little bit later. We want to make sure to lock them in if we can. And the way that we're going to try to lock them in for the most part is by giving them a reason to stick around. This is something that we're going to go into as we kind of get into the close of the presentation and that kind of stuff, but we always want to give people a reason to do something. If you have a marketing plan that's based on people just making the decision that you're the best and moving forward because you're so cool, you're probably going to have a bad time. You got to give somebody a reason to show up. You got to give somebody a reason to stick around. You got to give somebody a reason to take your call after they've watched the webinar, right? So the first step of that is locking them in. Two ways that we've seen this really working well for clients, some kind of a content giveaway. So if you have some sort of an ebook or something that you've published or a resource that could be useful, that's really helpful. Another thing too is a service that would be basically not challenging for you to fulfill on. So basically, there's a lot of things. If you have something that's templatable, some people do like a power of attorney, for example. If you can do a free power of attorney, then again, it's going to get them in your office. So you can obviously put conditions around it. You wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, I'm going to give a free estate plan to everyone who shows up or something like that, because you're going to have a lot of work to fulfill on, right? So make it easy for yourself. That's why I like content so much. PAS formula. So the PAS formula stands for problem, agitate, solution. This dates back to the early days of copywriting, back in the early 1900s, when a lot of people were doing direct mail. And this is kind of like the heart of a lot of the marketing. Well, it may have been a lot of the good marketing that's still around today. But basically, the reason that this works is that this actually kind of goes back to the conversation we were having earlier, Maddy, but we refer to this internally and with clients as rabbit ears, right? So if you guys, the rabbit ears, we kind of like, if you like, let's think about this. You're Oliver Fudd, you're stalking the bunny, right? And then when the bunny's just rolling around, it doesn't know that you're in the game to try to, take a shot at it and eat it for dinner, right? When the rabbit gets its ears up, that means it's worried about being hunted, right? And that is not the situation that's going to make somebody open to receiving a message, right? So the way that we avoid rabbit ears is we don't talk about ourselves, or we do the absolute bare minimum to make the presentation make sense. Again, you want to qualify yourself, obviously, but we want to avoid any sort of discussion of a pitch or what's coming at the end of it until as late as possible, because basically here's the gambit. If we don't talk about the sale, then they have an open mind that they can develop the idea that they like you, the idea that you're an expert, the idea that you know what you're talking about, and you have a process, right? They're not going to listen to your process if they're have their guard up and wondering where the sale is going to be coming, right? And again, obviously there is some sort of a plausible deniability here. For the most part, people are going to know that this isn't a public service thing that you're doing, but at the same time, we kind of want to play that. We want to play the game, and this formula really plays into it, because before we talk about what you can do, which is the S in that problem, agitate, solution formula, we're going to talk about why they should care. Nobody cares about the 2,900 different kinds of trust you can have, because what the heck is a trust in the first place? Can I get a will? What is this? No one cares about the what until they care about the why. Again, this is like, if you guys ever see a lot of these TED Talks, Simon Sinek, this is all, there's a lot of convergence in why these things end up working in the end. But again, if you have to tell people why they care. And basically when we start off with, we start about the pain. So I can talk about, Maddy, did we get any interesting, this could be fun. I'll see if I can do this on the fly. Any fun, interesting markets we can talk about that have popped up in the chat? We can go over it as an example. I can just do a state.
Bankruptcy was one of them.
Okay, bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is kind of interesting. We actually do we actually do quite a bit of bankruptcy lead generation, but that's a very lead generation market. But it's kind of interesting because it's on because you absolutely have the people that are typing in bankruptcy attorney Los Angeles right now, but it is kind of something that people evolve into. So I think there is an area where we could kind of, and let's get that one. Vito, I'm gonna go with the estate planning one.
Business law or trademarks, people who are entrepreneurs who don't know how to set up properly their business.
Okay, I like that. Okay, so let's go with setting up your business and trademark and stuff. Okay, so what's the pain associated with that? Generally, if you have a situation where your assets aren't protected, whether that's the formation of your business, God forbid you get sued, or you have some really, really valuable IP, and then you start off with telling them what they're at stake if they don't do anything today. So you guys know this, and for the most part, attorneys are in a kind of interesting situation because you're generally the person who prevents a problem from happening, but also in a lot of cases, you're the person who ends up solving it, right? So a lot of trademark lawyers will help you file your trademark, but as you guys probably know, the big money is in defending it with the litigation and that kind of stuff too. So this is a really, really common frame that we can use in any area of law. And again, we focus on the estate planning stuff, but basically you can say, hey, look, I'm like the guy who used to work for the IRS that is going to help you do your taxes. I used to go after people. I used to help people with doing that. It's going to be very, very expensive if you walk in my office on that day. But if you take these small steps, it's going to prevent you really, really big pain down the line. Now, how are we going to get to this pain? We're going to start off with a story. So I would recommend for any situation where you're going to start off with a story, this is where we're going to grab them by the shirt and let them know why this happens. And it's not saying, hey, I'm the big smart lawyer at the top of the hill. This is why you should do this because of this reason, that reason, that reason. It's let me tell you the story about somebody who didn't have this figured out. Automatic third-party credibility, right? We're starting this out and people are going to hear this. And again, when we have the choice to choose a story for the pain, I always say you want to build up the amplitude. The most money lost, the most crazy emotional story, the longest time it took. all these, but one of the crazy, and again, it could be a lot of different things too. Like, I get this really hilarious stories are great too. I remember we had a client, he was an estate planning attorney, and basically there was a situation where he was, it wasn't anything that was a crazy high monetary value, but there was this prized heirloom cuckoo clock that three sisters were fighting over. And one sister ended up grabbing the cuckoo clock off the wall, smacking the other one upside the head with it, and ran out of it. And then basically, it's a great story, right? But you can kind of imagine everyone's got a cuckoo clock in their family, even if you don't have a $20 million lake house in Mallorca that is going to get back or something like that, right? So and then we have to give color to the pain, right? Another thing too, this is just, big picture sort of thing. Don't assume your clients know what you know. Go into granular detail about all the consequences, not just financial, but personal costs. It's really stressful. You have the situation where, what's the emotional cost of losing what you might think is your big idea as an IT lawyer, intellectual property lawyer. If somebody has worked their entire life, they developed their PhD, they fought like heck to get this. I'm going to try not to curse. They fought like double hockey sticks to get the rights to this patent they developed in their PhD, and to have that taken away. What does that do to somebody's psyche? What does that do to their family? That person get divorced afterwards. Like, it's just, you have to really detail these explanations, right? And now I understand as a watcher why this is something I should pay attention to. Our attention should be up here when we do this correctly. Second part, agitate. This is for all the smart Alecs in the room that are on your webinar, right? So some people say, oh, this is great. Well, that sounds good. I should go to LegalZoom and get this handled. Right? So now you have to go into all the ways, because basically people don't know what they don't know. And this is what this section is for, right? So in the course of this section, we provide additional stories. I always recommend starting with one specifically about somebody who said, this is great, let me figure this out on my own. And best case scenario, a strategy or a situation where somebody wound up worse off and they had done nothing. Super common one that we see in the trust and estate space. Or actually this one, let's try to keep it on the IP track. Somebody writes out some crazy letter to themselves. They mail it to the US Patent Office. It gets rejected. But in the time between it getting rejected and them finding out, or they move addresses, they don't take care of this, they end up getting sued anyways because they thought they were operating under protection. They ended up building a huge infrastructure around this IP. They lost it all. And not only did they lose the IP, they lost the entire business that they invested to under the assumption that these things were correct. Wow, bad issue, right? And for any practice area or any business that you're doing, you know what the common mistakes are. We also think this is a fantastic thing to head on. Remember when I said basically the issues that people are trying to avoid are a very, very attractive thing to click on from an ad. Think about these issues, the things to avoid, right? This is also a fantastic headline if you want to do this on your own, right? But again, this is where you pretty much create distance between the people who think that they can do it, and also in the process, developing the expertise, kind of creating a narrative that you understand the next step, but you also know the next step after that, and the next step after that, and you have the big picture to help them out, right? Finally, the rabbit ears should be down. We can tell them how you can help out with this, right? And then this is where we switch gears in the story and we tell a good story, right? This is the story of my client, blah, blah, blah. He had a fantastic idea and he ended up patenting it with me. Down the line, we ended up having a situation where he got sued by Samsung or a patent troll or who knows, right? And at the same time, I was doing a crazy litigation that was, I mentioned earlier, that cost this person hundreds of thousands of dollars. We were able to point to the patent that I did, and under the stuff that I'm not a patent attorney, obviously, we were able to head this off of the curve and save him potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for the cost of the patent that we ended up doing right the first time for a couple $1,000, right? Then you talk about your process. Now, the thing is that there's some interesting ways to do this because some people do have a unique process, and if you have that, then this is absolutely an easy thing to do. You've probably already discussed this, but even for people who don't have a unique process, it's worthwhile explaining how this stuff works. Kind of going back to that old copywriting example, right? There's a very interesting, this actually got a version of this ended up making it into the show Mad Men, but there was actually, I'm trying to think, who was it? It was Claude Hopkins, absolute giant in the world of direct response marketing. Basically, he was writing an ad campaign for Schlitz beer, and he was talking about how awesome the filtration process was for the beer that they ended up doing and why they made it the freshest beer in the world. The truth is, every single beer company in the country at that point was filtering the water for their beer. It would be a really bad situation if it wasn't. But because they took the initiative to explain that to people, They were able to get all of the benefits from explaining that to them for the first time. If your process as an IP lawyer involves special stuff that you're doing, pretty much routine stuff that you're doing with the patent office, even if you walk through people through those steps, then you're going to show how that protects people. And then even if it isn't something special that you do, they're going to trust you more for doing it. This is where the tell more, sell more part ends up making sense, right? I think at the end of the day, people worry more about people taking what they know and running with it than they should. I think there are people that are going to try to DIY no matter what, and there's nothing that you're going to say or not say that's going to stop them. On the other hand, you have those people that are undecided, and that you stand to gain a lot with those people by being more forthcoming with the information that you share. So I always think it's on, I would err on the side of generosity when you're getting into this section. Now, finally, I recommend closing with an offer. And the way that I look at this is different than a lot of other people. One of the biggest issues, and this is a topic for an entire other webinar, is basically a lot of the people that kind of pioneered the webinar model did it with very, very different assumptions. So if you're talking about one of these guys like Russell Brunson, for example, a lot of people look to him as one of the big giants in webinar marketing. When Russell Brunson hosts a webinar, he's driven tens of thousands of traffic, tens of thousands of dollars of traffic towards it. He might have 100 or 500 or 2,000 people on that webinar. And basically he has a ticket price that could be between $500 and $1,000 or something much smaller, right? When we talk about the people that we're helping with estate planning, generally they're selling a service that's between $3,000 and $5,000. Now, in the internet marketing world, that would be what's referred to as a high ticket sale. A high ticket sale is not something you're going to close at the end of 40 to 60 minutes. There's not a lot of people that have $800 in their bank account right now, let alone $3,000 to $5,000, right? So we cannot hope to close this on a webinar. So the best way to have is get the opportunity to set up a call later, right? Now, there's some nuance to this, but even if you don't have a super high ticket thing, I generally recommend this. And the way that a lot of people teach webinars is, oh yeah, you got to do this crazy zany triple Lindy backflips value stack thing, and then at the end, get them the opportunity to enter their credit card. If you're charging more than $500 for something, I would say, and it's not something that we work with below. But basically, if it's a very low ticket, you might want to consider this and, go to Russell Brunson. He's got a great formula for that. But if you're doing a service, especially something that's higher ticket, what your offer should be is to get on the phone with somebody on your team. And then for the most part, if you're a solo attorney, that could be you. If you have somebody that's working with you, that could be your front desk. I always like to say team, if for no other reason, it's going to make your life easier if you ever decide to step out of this. But basically, you want to give them an offer to move forward. So the way that we set this up internally is we give them the option to book on a calendar, right? And that's not for the full consultation, that's for a 15-minute intro call. But at the same time too, we have to tell them what's coming. And the reason why this has to be an offer is that we can't just say, hey, come into my office for your free consultation. The reason why a consultation that's free today is going to be free tomorrow. There's no reason to act now. And when you're following up for somebody, right? And this is where we're going to get to in the next section. You can't say, hey, you didn't want the free consultation yesterday. Do you want it now? Because chances are nothing's going to change. At that point, you're just bugging somebody, right? On the flip side, if we make this an offer that can expire, now we have a cookie to give somebody when we're reaching out to them. So basically, don't do a free consultation. Do a cool consultation. Do a, this is an example that I really, really like. Way back in the day when we were doing the AdWords stuff, we had a family law attorney, and he had a really, really high retainer. So he was a 10K retainer. He charged $300 for a consultation. And we had the fun job of trying to sell this against people who are doing free consultations in a pretty competitive market. So first of all, I told the guy I was crazy, but then basically he said, we got to get this figured out. Otherwise it's not worth my time. So we went ahead and did it. So the first thing that we did is we took consultation out, and then people just in their minds added free to it, which was really surprising. And then ultimately we found out that it wasn't really working out for him. So what we did after that, we said, okay, well, everyone's doing a free consultation. No one's going to pay for something that everyone else says is free. So instead of a consultation, we offered a winning divorce game plan. And people would gladly pay $300 for a winning divorce game plan, because if you're paying that and this guy is so good, then this is absolutely, the guy had the credentials too, which is always an important thing to back it up. But you can't just do a paid version of something else. So basically, hey, let's say we're closing with that offer. Just because you had the time to take this webinar, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. Because you've watched this far, we're willing to give our $300 winning divorce game plan session for you, free of charge, but as long as spaces last, right? So if you want to take advantage of that, We've got 5 slots next for next week. Click the link in this webinar right now and get something set up. So that's just how we close it. Again, we're not going to tell people we're going to call them afterwards, but we're going to get into how we actually do that later, right? So overall structure, we're going to start off with an intro, introduce yourself, quick stats, usually a good way to bring attention, really brief bio. I didn't even go over that because it's pretty simple stuff. Start with a pain story, then go into the pain section. Agitate story, agitate theory. Solution story, solution theory. Close the Q&A if you'd like to. If you guys are doing one of these live webinars, I would recommend doing a Q&A session, or a Q&A section, because it makes it look more live, right? And the last thing is we want to have an offer close. And again, the offer I would recommend is a exploding offer on something, right? It's probably going to be a consultation if you're an attorney, but you have to give it a name and you have to give it a value, right? So big picture metrics to shoot. Yeah.
Before you get into the metrics, can you go back for one slide? I just want to talk about the Q&A for a second, because if that's important, just want to have a little more clarity around that. If you set up Q&A for a recorded and you want it to seem live webinar, do you bring people on and that you know the questions they're going to ask? How do you set that sort of thing up? Okay, super good question. So basically, if you take somebody who's been running seminars for a super long time and you're running the same seminar every week, chances are, 70–80% of the questions are going to be the same ones every time, or some variance, right? So chances are, if you were to answer those questions on a call, a lot of people will have asked that. So the way that we set it up is we basically make a Q&A box, and this is a disclaimer we say up front. All right, guys, if we're getting started with the webinar, just by the way, we really appreciate your questions. There's a box under it. So if you want to enter your question right now, we're going to take as much time as we can to answer those at the end of the webinar. If I don't get to your question, we're going to I'll do my best to get to you in the next couple of days. And then that's basically how we hedge. And then we basically have the questions are either it's a combination of ones that get asked frequently. You guys know what those are. Or stuff that are kind of softballs too. So it's like one of the ones I always say is, hey, this is one we always recommend. This seems complicated. How long does this all take? Well, funny you should ask. So the first thing that we do is you actually come into our office and then we set this up, and it is this and this and this and this. So you're actually pacing what they're going to actually be doing in the course of working with you, which is actually a further rapport building thing. But that's the kind of thing. So a combination of frequently asked questions and softballs for the most part. Okay. And you could either basically queue them up in the Q&A, or you could act as if you're reading the Q&A and queue them up for yourself, basically. Yeah. And best practices as far as live webinars, I would turn off a chat feature, kind of make it one way. Because the thing is that if they're the only person who's attending the webinar, like they don't want to see it's crickets and then, oh yeah, well, let me look at this giant list of questions. Just pick these through. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Okay. And then big picture metrics to shoot for. Okay, webinar completion rate. So most platforms will have one of these. So basically the level of interest that somebody has in the webinar is going to determine how likely they are to make it towards the end. The number that we shoot for internally is a baseline of 70. 70 to 80 is usually the range that we're looking at. If you have a webinar that's doing more than 80%, that's fantastic. That's a super engaging webinar. But again, in between the people that are dropping off, all that kind of stuff, 70% is a number to shoot for. Another thing to keep in mind too, this is assuming it's going to be a live or perceived to be live webinar. If we're giving people the option to watch this whenever, a lot of the times people will watch it whenever, which ends up usually being never, right? So a lot of built into this is the illusion that this thing is live. And the last thing is this engagement rate, right? So the engagement rate is the amount of people that take the first action on your call to action. And again, like I recommend, it's probably going to be a call with your team. But again, 10% is what we usually shoot for. If it's lower than that, then we can work on the close or work on how we're kind of buttering it up leading into that. Part 3, playing offense. Okay. 10% might have seemed kind of low to you as far as what to really expect from somebody moving forward or whatever. That's because it is, right? If we're putting all this effort into a webinar and only 1 out of 10 people is taking the next step, then it's going to be hard to make some money on this. But the good news is that you don't need to, right? So for every appointment, this is actually super early. This is actually back from June of 2020. It was a couple years into the model. So this is a month where the client that was ending up running this ended up closing 12 high ticket estate plans on this, on 40 registrations and 26 combined views and replays. Only 8 people engaged. She was actually on the high end. This is about a 20% engagement rate. But at the same time, basically that was clicking to the landing page for scheduling it. That was less than 5 appointments. How do you go from 5 appointments to 12 closed clients? Because they were following up with the people that had viewed and the replays, right? So this is basically it. It's a huge paradigm shift. I think a lot of the way that people market, honestly, webinars as a process, they make it seem so automated and so automatic, right?
I would love it if all we had to do is set this thing up and then just, shake your lobster trap and then just see all the clients start falling out and then you're bending over backwards trying to fulfill the business. The reality is, in this instance, we had about five people that were willing to book an appointment that weren't willing to book the first step. If you have 10%, that's 9 people that are open to have an appointment that are not willing to take the first step. So that taking that first step towards somebody is so important. And I'm not going to scroll all the way back there, but if you think back to that pyramid we were talking about in the beginning, the people that are booking right now are the people who probably signed up for this because they were looking to buy. That's the 3%. The people that you're able to follow up with, and I'll show you guys how to do that, is the remaining 30 plus 7% to get you to that much larger part of the pyramid. Another super interesting thing. A lot of times people end up getting disheartened by this because there's a big difference in contact rate and close rate. So this is actually something I ended up looking at. This is a story from way back in the day. I was ended up doing we were just actually trying out cold calling as a way to set our own appointments, right? And we had this situation where it was really hard to get people on the phone. And we ended up looking in the world of call centers, something that you're probably super familiar with, Maddy. But there's different there's different metrics in place. And one of the biggest metrics that call centers look at is contact rate, i.e., if I had 10 people on the list, how many people am I going to actually get on the phone? That's contact rate. People in our experience have more of an issue with contact rate, and they think that it's an issue with close rate. There's a lot of reasons for this. I think a lot of people are looking for this stuff not to work out, because the bad news is that if this works out, then you have a lot of calls to make. The good news is that if you make those calls, you're going to make money, but a lot of times people aren't open to the possibility of this working. But basically, contact rate is actually where more people end up falling than actually setting the appointments when we end up getting to this, especially when you're using a script like I'm going to show you in a little bit. But basically, as far as maximizing the contact rate, there's these are sort of our best practices. If we have a webinar, let's say the webinar is an hour, the best time to call them is after the webinar finishes. It's top of mind. And then basically, you can assume that they're at least remember what they're doing. If you wait a while, there's, that study that gets trotted out all the time. And then Clio does a version of this almost every year. If you wait too long, you're going to have a much less, lower likelihood of actually getting somebody on the phone. So right after is the best. The way that we usually recommend to stuff internally is that if you have a webinar and it's generally going to be about an hour, call them between an hour and 2 hours afterwards. That gives you a nice, not impossible window, but a decent enough window to make sure that they at least remember that they saw the webinar. If you can't call them right then, the best time to contact them, and you'll see some commonalities and the recommendations they're making, is when it's convenient for them. Don't call them on your lunch break, right? Call them when, don't call them when it's convenient for you, when it's convenient for them. These are recommendations. We had an additional slot that we used to do during COVID, but basically the best times in our opinion since COVID have hit are when people are like running the clock, right? Time isn't real. It hasn't been real for a long time. And hopefully after everyone gets the vaccine, it's going to be a little bit more real. But for the time being, we have a much higher chance of contacting people if we're dialing them when they're waiting for lunch, 11 to noon, and waiting for dinner, so about 4 to 6. And you can be a little bit before or after this in the meantime. But if you think about it, like, when are you getting into the zone? If I get a phone call at 10:15, there's no chance I picked up. I just got into the zone. I drank my coffee. I cleared out my emails. I'm starting to do the real work, like writing stuff like this. So if somebody calls, I don't care. Bother me when I'm done doing stuff, right? And your clients are the same way too. Everyone's working from home right now. A lot of people are running with kids and that kind of stuff. So, just be respectful of people's time. And if you are empathetic towards when they're available, you're going to have a better experience. Okay, and basically what we're going to do is now see, once we get people on the phone, how we're going to turn them into a consult, right? And this is, I guess it's a 4-step process. I should have done a little proofreading before I did this, but 4-step process: hook, offer, qualify, and close. Okay, so the hook is dead simple. And there's a lot of commonality. It's kind of interesting. We started using a version of this pretty quickly after we started the webinar model as a whole, but it was really interesting. I was listening to a podcast with Jordan Belfort, the guy that The Wolf of Wall Street was based on. And he actually used a really similar version of this. And what he would do when he was calling for Stratton Oakmont or whatever it was, hi, this is Jordan Belfort. I have your name because you filled in, requested a top stocks report. Do you have a minute to talk about XYZ opportunity? Exact same format. Hi, is Maddy available? This is Jan from the Roos Law Office. I'm calling because you watched our webinar on how to be the best, how to be the absolute best educational marketer in the world. Does that ring a bell? And it's a very easy way to respond and it also qualifies people. You'll have situations where somebody signs up for a webinar You think they attended, and if they didn't watch it, they'll say, oh shoot, no, I remember signing up for that, but I didn't actually show up. And that point, so you can say, all right, cool, we got the replay coming out soon, or here's a link or whatever, right? But if it does ring a bell, it's a very, very low, easy compliance thing to happen. It's going to basically, it's going to, and sometimes in the best cases too, when you end up bringing this, people are like, oh my God, yeah, thank you so much for calling. I love the webinar. That was great. That's a great, I mean, don't expect that every time, but when that happens, that'll happen. Now we got to switch, right? So we have their attention. We know that we're in the right place, right? So basically, this is why it becomes super important to have an offer to follow up with people. We can't do free consultation because we'd have nothing to say here. The more juicy we make what we're dangling at the end of the webinar, the more this question is doing them a favor. So I wanted to reach out because we only have a few spots left for that $750 family planning session. If you're interested, you have a couple quick minutes to set that up. Now we're not, so again, we're giving people someone. We have a couple spots left. We're building in some time scarcity. We're building in just basically, we're adding value by asking this question. And it becomes really, really hard to chase somebody, because if we're just asking somebody, if you want to talk to me with a chance that you're going to end up spending a lot of money after, most people are going to say, yeah, no, I'm good, thanks, no worries. But again, this is why it's important to have that. And this is one of those structural things. If you don't have it, it's going to be really, really tough. And assuming they say yes, again, there are going to be some people that say no, or I was just checking it out, or I'm a competitive attorney, thanks for the presentation, that was cool. But if they say yes, then we basically just say, all right, cool, well, here's what's next. No decision to be made on this call. Just have a few questions for you to make sure things are a good fit. Is that all right? Asking permission. Most people will not object to that. This is probably the is that all right at this part of, for instance, the question we're gonna get the fewest no's to. Now we get to qualify them. So I don't know, Maddy, do you guys do a lot of training on qualification on other calls like this? Or is this like, would you say this is like more or less a pretty known thing to go over?
Well, for people who work with Smith.ai, we go over it a lot. If you're using us for, lead screening and intake, there's a lot of back and forth here. Normally 3 to 5 is what we recommend. Okay, gotcha.
And yeah, same here. And if you guys just like, 10,000 foot view qualification, is this somebody who has a problem that you can solve, or is it worth spending time with this person? Again, 3 to 5 is good. Like, you could ask somebody 100 questions, but you're going to have this, like, there's going to be a pretty big drop off on that. One of the things I always recommend, right? Is there anyone else involved in making decisions? Anyone else who wants to be in this call? A lot of the times, when we're talking about personal legal services, if you have the wife, they're going to want to make the decision with the husband. If you have the husband, they're going to want to make the decision with the wife. If it's an elder care thing, they might need the elder in question to be present for the discussion, or the daughter, or whoever, right? So basically, this helps you avoid the question of getting to the end of your fantastic consultation that you're going to have with this person saying, this sounds awesome, let me go talk to my wife about this. And that's the situation that no one wants to be in.
Well, so you also might find that, like, a business partner says, I'm going to take this call right now and I'll discuss it with my business partner, my business partners, plural, if there are multiple, after we have this conversation. At least you get some idea of, is there someone else who's going to be, having this discussion with them. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we move too far on, in the qualification questions, those are really important. The only thing you're not going to do here that we would normally recommend is, how did you hear about us, right? Because you already know how they heard about you, but typically in those 3 to 5, maybe we would make it 4 to 6, we're adding on, what was that source of that lead? How did you hear about our law firm? So just to keep that in mind if you're thinking about qualification questions in general.
Super cool. And then basically how I recommend closing with this is basically, okay. And again, there's also the possibility that they qualify themselves out, in which case the close would be, well, thanks for talking. I don't think we can help, but hope you enjoy the webinar and have a great life. Otherwise, we're going to basically say, okay, cool. Well, sounds like we might be able to help out. The next step would be to schedule your $750 family planning session. You mentioned your husband's going to be important for discussing this. And then I wouldn't say any of this is particularly brilliant, but this is probably, you don't ask, can I get your husband in the room? Can I get your wife together? You just basically, this is an assumptive close. What's a time that works for both of you? What's a time that works for all your business partners? Or what's the time for mention that you and your daughter, when time can you both work? And there's like objections. It's probably going to be, we're not going to have time to kind of go into all the predictions, but 8 out of 10 times, if you have this a presupposition, people are just going to go with it, right? Otherwise, you're going to have to fight back to beg them to get that second other person on the call after the fact. So basically just start out with the assumption that you're going to get both of them on the call. And then basically that's it, believe it or not. Honestly, you have to remind them that you're there, and just going back to the 4-step process, Remind them why they're calling you, because it's a very important thing to start out when somebody's picking up a call. Making sure that they understand why you're calling and give them a reason to talk to you now, qualify them to make sure they're worth talking to, and then get them on a next step. Super, super basic stuff. Okay. And one last thing I didn't mention on the contact rate stuff, but I want to bring in now. If people don't pick up on the first call, I'd recommend calling them again. I'm in New York most of the time. If I get a call from a 917 number and it's not in my contacts, I never pick it up. I guarantee if I pick up their call, they're talking about they're talking to me in Mandarin, right? If you end up having one of those, but again, your clients are going through this too. If somebody calls me twice, I have to assume they either know me. Most auto dialers can't double dial. So that's another little quick tip. If you guys are having issue with your contact rate, I mean, we just nothing super crazy. We just call it the double dial internally.
So Jan, I will say one thing, and then I'll let you sort of wrap up. I know we've got 4 minutes left, but don't just call, twice. It's really like 6 times we find, especially from the data that came out from Lead Docket, which is an intake solution now under Filevine. You may have heard of it. They did a great study and they showed that with 93% confidence after 6 calls, you have a pretty clear sense of whether or not someone's going to move forward. So that's a typical lead flow. It's not specific to the webinar model, but it does show that follow-up matters and a substantial sort of impact on the number of leads you convert to clients. So, if someone is telling you to stop contacting them, obviously stop contacting them. But if they haven't said no yet, it might not be the right time. They might be saving all of your, voicemails or emails or texts if that's a follow-up method. But don't necessarily cut it off before you have any data to show that you need to cut it off.
Yeah, I always say, it's like innocent until proven guilty. Good prospect until proven I'm not interested. Get out of my hair.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Within reason, and also paced out for your practice area, right? So if this is something that is opportunistic, you've agitated it, you've identified that there is a solution to the eventual or expected problem, then you might not need to have it be every single day to make a call. You could space it out. If it's something that's more urgent, those of you who are in criminal defense, personal injury, et cetera, if things with deadlines, obviously are going to speed up that follow-up.
Yeah. And one last thing too, just as far as the double dial, when that first contact, and actually on all subsequent contacts, it's 2 dials right in a row, because basically, and then over time, I think we usually, I'd say internally, I guess I'm trying to think whether this would count as 2 dials or, so we're calling up first. And then the thing is that after you do that, so if somebody sees 2 missed calls from the same number, they're actually more likely to pick up the second time that we found. And then basically we try to dial a couple of times every time. But yeah, at least probably, 2, 3 is what we recommend for estate planning. Actually at least 3, but basically, yeah, beyond that, again, it's like, you've done your due diligence, there's diminishing returns to that at some point. But again, if you stop after the first attempt, like I said, you just did the job of educating your market for your competition. So take advantage of this. Okay. All right. So final note, as far as actually getting to the consultation, you definitely have a leg up versus a cold traffic source or something from Google or something from one of those top 3% most urgent things. But don't take it for granted. It's not a magic bullet. You absolutely have 40 to 60 minutes of a leg up, but that does not mean, it's a given. You can kind of just show up and treat it like this is somebody who's heard the world about you. Again, they've heard a lot more than any of those other traffic sources, but you still have to do some work in taking command of the consultation, establishing leadership, and giving them a reason to actually move forward. But that's longer discussion for a longer time. And then I guess that's pretty much it. I guess let's get to the Q&A. I think it'll probably be something in the notes or something. Yeah. Well, I don't know how much.
we have 0 time left. We have 1 minute left, so let's do this. You will get a copy of this recording, or you're watching the recording. But there will be notes provided. Jan, everyone's asking for your slides, so send me your deck, the latest version, please. And the other thing that I will say is that obviously we want to make sure that you can keep tabs on Jan. So I want to make sure that you share how people can follow and reach you and get more of your great content. And then, without further ado, obviously also introduce the idea that Smith.ai can make these calls for you if you want help following up. So feel free to get in touch about that if we can be of service to you there. Jan, how can people find out more about what you do and CaseFuel and get more of this great content you're producing here?
Okay, fantastic. And yeah, I gotta say, guys, going from the 1 to the 10 is all about the stuff that Smith.ai can help you with. At the end of the day, it's like basically a lot of times it's more on the contact rate that a lot of people mess this up. You know, if you do the calls, people are gonna be in your office, just believe that. But anyway, yeah, I would say probably best next step. If you guys want to search Law Firm Growth Podcast and wherever fine podcasts are delivered, check that out. I'm also available on LinkedIn. I'm the guy who says Jan Roos, legal marketing expert. There's a couple other, it's actually a very common name in the Netherlands, but anyway, if they look like me without a beard, then that is the guy you're looking for. But yeah, as far as that, next steps, and the only other thing too, we just started a group for helping people out with the intake side of stuff. These scripts are the kind of stuff that we talk about. A lot of things we're doing right now. If you guys are an estate planning attorney, we're doing a consultation masterclass that's going to be available for free when you join the group. And that would be if you go to facebook.com/groups/double your case files, all spelled out. And then basically that'll just be free to join, and then you have access to the course once you're in there. So that would kind of be the other thing. But yeah, if you if you like what I've been talking about here, we got it every week on the podcast as well. So
awesome. Jan, thank you so much. You know, this was a phenomenal session, and I think we all learned a lot. I know there are a lot of people who are going to watch this 2 or 3 times because you just went through a lot of content in record speed. So thank you for joining me here today. And wow, what amazing value you delivered. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay, thank you so much, Maddy.